thought I was lost.
Recording.
Is it asking you now?
Yeah, it is. Uh-huh.
Okay.
I see it. I see it at the top. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm gonna pause it again.
Okay.
Here. Okay. Hello, everyone. Today we have Dr. Irene Vélez Torres presenting in this seminar series. Dr. Vélez Torres is a professor in the School of Natural Resource and Environmental Management at Universidad del Valle in Cali, Colombia. She also served as the head of the Ministry of Mines and Energy for the government of Colombia during the 2022-2023 term. And during her time as a government official, she was charged with leading the Just Energy Transition Program for the entire country. Dr. Vélez is an activist, researcher, and a professor dedicated to the critical and participatory study of environmental and agrarian conflicts. She earned her PhD in political geography from the University of Copenhagen and her master's in cultural studies from Universidad Nacional in Colombia. She also earned a degree in bachelor's in philosophy from Universidad Nacional in Colombia. Irene's research focuses on the intersections within historical processes of ethno-racial and class-based discrimination. She was a Fulbright scholar, a co-chair of the Latin American Studies Association, and an assistant editor of the journal Geoforum, as well as the director of the Interdisciplinary Research Group on Biotechnological Innovation and Eco-Social Change at Universidad del Valle. She had extensively studied land grabbing and forced displacement issues in conflict zones, including the impacts of the armed conflict on food sovereignty. Okay, Dr. Vélez, welcome, and please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vanegas, for this invitation, and thank you to the audience. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be able to share some of my experiences and future directions in my research. I'm going to share this presentation with you, and please let me know if I am facing any technical problem while I'm in the chat, in the presentation. Is it already being shown, my presentation here? Okay, excellent. No, let me silence this thing first. Otherwise, we are gonna, yeah, perfect. Right. So what I would like to share with you is some of the trajectories and the way those trajectories can look in the future. And I have decided to focus a little bit on what have been my main contributions to the areas of environmental geography and Latin American studies. And I'm also trying to be sure about how to connect my experience, my interest with what the center is looking for. So I'm gonna divide this presentation in these 5 subjects. I will start by talking a little bit about my trajectory and then go more into how the future research is gonna look like. So first of all, I would like to explain that my research trajectory is based on what I prefer to call activist scholarship, which basically means that I am always connecting with grassroots organizations and local communities in order to understand with them and for their political agendas what are the forces of socio-ecological change. This is how I came to focus in the area of the Cauca River Valley, where my family is coming from and where I have been a professor for the last 10 years. So in that context, I would call my research also an area research, in the sense that it has been very layered in relation to what are the different processes of dispossession or extractivism in the area. I have studied from my PhD what I call the governmental extractivism, which is basically to try to unpack the different legal architectures that are built in the neoliberal state, especially since the 1990s, in order to expand the agrarian and the large-scale mining frontiers. So for that, what I am showing here is two photographs of the same area, which is the Cauca River Valley. And what you see on your right-hand side is the area before a huge dam was built in the 80s. And on the right-hand side, the same area, also aerial photographed, showing how the sugarcane monoculture has expanded in the last decades. Basically, that landscape change has resulted in an area that is mostly covered by sugarcane monoculture with a very intensive use of toxic and hazardous substances for the agrarian and corporate agriculture, at the same time generating the marginalization of local inhabitants, particularly Afro-descendants that used to work in the haciendas model, but also indigenous communities that have been marginalized and confined in the upper high mountains of the same area. In addition to agrarian extractivism, I have also researched mining extractivism. And with mining extractivism, I understand not only the legal frameworks that have pushed for corporate-led large-scale mining, particularly in the extraction of gold, but also many geographies of illegal extraction of gold that have competed with what we call traditional small-scale mining. Here, I want to make the difference between artisanal small-scale mining that will typically use mercury versus traditional clean mining. And this is important because it's one of the ethnic features that we are going to find in the areas where I have been studying. In the map, in the social cartography that you find in the right-hand side, what I am trying to show, this was built, of course, with the miners from the area, is the competing mining models. So in green, we have highlighted all the mining that is being used or that is being done without the use of mercury. And with red, we have highlighted the areas that have used mercury. In the same mining geography, we then have these two different exploitation models that have particularities that are very interesting in terms of gender and age variables. Because most of the use of mercury has been concentrated in younger people and in the men of this particular territory, which means that both gender and age are crucial differences among the population that are pushing for the use of mercury. we not only have made an effort to understand this kind of local dynamics of contamination and gold exploitation, but also we have used those features, that kind of knowledge, in order to transform that reality. And for that, we have made a campaign, an educational campaign, trying to address those differences and trying to make people understand better what could be the health and environmental consequences of mercury contamination in the area. Environmental racism, as have been described in the case of mercury, is also the case in the agrarian frontier of sugarcane. So we have also researched the use of glyphosate, that in Colombia is not only used for as a pesticide, but also in the program of forced eradication of coca crops, and in addition as a substance for the ripening of sugarcane crops in the same area that I have been describing. These three different uses of glyphosate have been going on for more than 2 to 3 decades, which means that the geographies of expansion of different crops are now very polluted. And we have also addressed that pollution in relation to the body land disposition, understanding how water contamination has forced people into displacement, like an environmental led displacement. Also how the use of glyphosate in sugarcane monoculture have damaged food crops of ethnic communities, also putting at risk the food sovereignty of those communities in the lowlands of the Cauca River. And finally, how people have declared chronic intoxication. This has also led us to engage with some of the nationally struggles against the use of glyphosate, particularly important for the fight against the forced eradication of coca crops, which in 2015 managed to be stopped thanks to the national mobilization of rural communities and academics that were supporting the demands. Going into coca, I have also researched slow violence and then necropolitics of anti-narcotics, basically to demonstrate that the peace agreement that was signed between the national government and the FARC left-wing guerrilla in 2016 had a neoliberal guideline or a neoliberal framework. This neoliberal governmentality that also reflected in the way the peace treaty was created has generated other consequences. Particularly, I am interested in how this framework has denied the ethnic and gender geographies of the territories in conflict, which means that when the agreement was proposed, it didn't take into consideration the legacies and the trajectories of rural conflict that was in place, not only the armed conflict, but also other pre-existing social and environmental conflicts that were relevant to understand the complexities of the geographies where the agreement was going to be implemented. In addition to that, the former Duque government decided to change the perspective of the agreement and also stopped some of the most important peace programs, particularly the ones concerning the integral rural reform and the substitution of coca crops. That kind of delay made it impossible for rural communities to actually substitute the illegal economies. Instead, what we are facing now is a new cycle of rural violence that I explain as connected to the lack of proper implementation of the peace agreement. And in analyzing that failure or delayed or fragmented implementation of the peace agreement, I have been very interested in the environmental geographies of coca cultivation. And just to mention some of the findings that I have been able to demonstrate are related to the land politics of the territories where where coca cultivation is taking place, showing that the scarcity and insecurity of land ownership is one of the pushing factors for communities to start growing coca, demonstrating as well how gender difference makes women a lot more vulnerable as compared to men in coca geographies, and how the women's engagement in the coca economies have been persistently denied in understanding both the conflict and the implementation of the agreement. So as a way of example, women are very engaged in picking coca leaves and cooking for the coca growers. And despite of that kind of engagement, the agreement didn't recognize those roles as relevant, and their economies were not replaced. So only the peasants that were actually growing coca, having the land to grow coca, were granted the right of substitution. So all these women were left behind in the peacemaking strategy that was designed by the government. And that kind of biased implementation of the agreement has, of course, generated a re-victimization of women in conflict. I have embraced engaged research, which means that my methods have always been participatory. As I said before, I have decided to respond with my methods and with my research to what are the concerns of the people, of the local communities, of the impoverished communities, of the marginalized communities. And therefore, I have attempted to create knowledge that is also useful for the communities. So we have always tried to go back to the communities and disseminate and make sure that they can use what is being produced, sometimes with more efficiency than others, but always trying to make that bridge, not only for the information and the data to come to academic languages, but also for the academia to be able to respond to that demand of citizenship and rights. So some of the methods that we have, or I have been leading, have to do with popular education, which is basically to go to areas and populations that have not been formally educated, but still build with them a certain curriculum that can be of use for the struggles that they are facing in their territories, and doing that through the channels that local regional universities have in Colombia. Social cartography has been very useful in order to make different representations of territory in geographies of dispossession. Filmmaking, both made participatory, but also sometimes more in a more highly qualified production setting. We have collaborated with other academics in order to make analytical chemistry, toxicology, environmental engineering, GIS methods, ethnobotany, and ethnography. And that collaboration has gone international. I have been able to connect with several universities in Latin America, in Europe, and in North America. And those kinds of connections have made it possible not only to cross disciplinary borders, which has been an epistemological aim of all the research, but also to try to connect different institutions with different different resources available. That's particularly relevant in the case of chemical and environmental engineering, as the technologies that are available in Colombia, not only at the university level, but also at institutional levels, are very limited, misfunctioning, not always sufficiently acute in terms of what we are trying to research. So those collaborations have been very important, crucial, I will say, to be able to grasp what is actually happening in the areas of research. I have been able to lead and co-lead different research reaching grants that go over $6 million approximately, and those are some of the institutions that have financed our projects in the last decade. Resulting of that research that I have embraced, I have been able to publish more than 45 peer-reviewed academic journals, most of them in Q1 international journals, some of them in Spanish as well, as I do believe that it is important to have some circulation of academic results also in the language of the communities where the research is taking place. I am associate editor of Geoforum, which is also very relevant in terms of how to connect with the context of publishing academic content. And I am a board and editorial member of a newly launched journal called Environment and Security. I have not only published academic content or in academic forms or in the traditional academic language and delivery journals, but I have also made an effort to go pedagogical in terms of the research. And that's why we have published several booklets for local communities, trying to also connect with their language and with the knowledge that we know is going to be relevant for the communities. We have made a podcast series on mercury contamination, virtual learning environments for rural schools in Colombia. And we are also working on multi and transmedia dissemination and education, at the moment working with Trocha de Paz, which is an initiative to visualize what are the efforts for peacemaking in rural Colombia. And we have also done 3 feature documentaries that have been screened in different international TV channels and have participated and been awarded in more than 60 film festivals around the world. These documentaries have been very high quality and, as I said, long feature, but we have also work producing short participatory documentaries in which the local communities become filmmakers, script writers, and this kind of very locally based, locally designed content that actually circulates a lot within rural areas. So even though some of them have been screened in festivals, the most important circulation audience of those participatory videos has been the rural territories. I have been sharing the Latin American Studies Association and a member of the Environmental Peace Building Association, a global initiative for environmental peace building, and for a period also a minister in my country. From these legacies of research, I aim to lead 3 research to lead my research in 3 directions that complement each other. and that, of course, draw from what I have already done. So first of all, I want to look at the market-led accumulation by decarbonization, which is a way of saying how to critically address the energy transition that is a global consensus, but that is reproducing structures and relationships of accumulation on one side and dispossession on another. So the objective is to look at those relationships at a global scale, but always looking at how it materializes in the local. So where are the projects and what kind of impacts are being generated in those geographies of transition? And what are the trade-offs of the energy transition? What kind of corporate-led schemes are being set? What are the governments doing and saying in order to make the transition happen in this particular corporate-led scheme? Is there any alternative voice, any alternative structure of distribution of wealth and damage in the new energy transition? And I am also very interested in addressing the geopolitics of that transition. Where is it being negotiated? With what kind of discourses? What kind, again, of governmentalities behind negotiations? Following the energy transitions, I am eager to address the new mining rush. That's something that has already been happening in Chile, particularly, maybe in the last decade at least. But in many other countries of Latin America, the rush is only starting now. So I think it's gonna be a new front of struggle and dispute between local communities and the corporations that are interested in exploiting the minerals, but this time with a green label. So I think it's very interesting to address this as a paradox in the sense that these minerals are meant to be good to fight climate change. But on the other hand, they are also creating new gendered and ethnic conflicts in the areas where the minerals are actually extracted from. And finally, I am hoping to continue with addressing toxic geographies and body land suffering. So the idea of researching pesticides and fertilizers in agrarian frontiers and how that is affecting both human health, but also environmental health, and even beyond the human aspect of contamination, what is happening with the other beings that inhabit those territories. Mercury in artisanal small-scale gold mining is still very relevant in Latin America, and particularly in Colombia, being the third polluter at the global scale, and Peru being the second. So there are at least two Latin American countries that are there to be researched, and I am looking forward to continue with that research. And finally, the chemical war on drugs, where glyphosate has been very important, but it may be that at some point there is other hazardous substance that is being used, and I would like to be there to try to understand what kind of human and environmental suffering is emerging from that expansion of frontiers. In terms of the Latin American Center at San Anthony's College, I am bringing a few ideas that could support the effort that the college is doing to become a center for Latin American, not only Latin American academia, but also Latin American culture. So I am suggesting to have a Latin film periodical screening in which we bring one fiction or documentary film that is made in Latin America and that explains what Latin America is. Also having a tea time where we can discuss current affairs of Latin America and maybe have it available for broader audiences to participate and to exchange in that kind of those kinds of debates. And once a year, I was thinking about the relevance of the 12th of October, but it can be maybe other dates that become more relevant in the future. One initiative could be We Are All the Voices, trying to engage and invite people that are not academics, but tell a lot about what Latin America is. So social organizations, communities, representatives of those social entities. And also take the opportunity to interact with politicians and political actors as keynote speakers, who can also come and exchange with the students and faculty at the center. Thank you very much. These are my suggestions, contribution.
All right, thank you. Majo, what was the timing?
Yeah, so for the introduction was almost 1 minute. Then were 15 minutes when you were in topic 3. And at the end is 28:53 seconds.
The total?
28.
Yes.
Okay, so double.
Yeah. So yeah, I like you were in topic number 3 when you had the time.
Okay,
Okay.
super. Well, not super, but super no.
Well, I'm gonna suggest, since we only have about 20 minutes to finish the hour, and then Jen will have to jump off and we have our group meeting. Let's do the overview of your syllabus for the proposed class. And we put, more suggestions in the Q&A. We already have a bunch. And
Okay.
then I'll share that with you afterwards.
Perfect. So I'm gonna continue.
Yes.
And then if we have time within the hour, we can, where is it again? Are you still seeing my screen? No,
No.
it's here, it's here.
I have a question. The time for the explain the syllabus, that also have a time or no?
Yes, it is 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thanks, Majo.
Okay, so this is a syllabus proposed for a master program on Latin American studies and environmental geography. My subject for this course is extractivisms, which is one key organizing concept that has impacted academic production in the last 2 decades in Latin America. For this course, I have 3 learning goals. First of all, I would like the students to be able to engage with excellent scholarship on extractivisms, appropriating theories and positioning their own work in relation to the theories that have been created around this concept. Secondly, I aim for the students to be able to organize or engage in the comprehension of extractivisms in relation to the temporality of its development. And finally, I aim at giving the students the tools for them to connect their master's topic with extractivisms. So I am departing from a concept of extractivism in which is not only the relationship of taking natural resources from the ground or from a land or an area, but transferring the wealth of those natural resources somewhere else and leaving behind, leaving to the local areas, to the local people, the damages of that transfer. So basically it is within the conceptualization of an unequal exchange of natural resources and the connected wealth and damage that is created from that transaction. It has different temporalities. I am going to be focusing in 3-4 of them. The first one, the 90s and the neoliberal and reprimization of economies in the whole Latin America. The second trend that I am going to be looking at is the left-wing progressive shift that took place in the 2000s with all the left-wing governments in Latin America, Chavez, Evo, Correa. Later with the right-wing populism embodied by in Colombia, Uribe, and later a little bit of Santos, Bolsonaro, very importantly, and the Chilean that I forgot. And finally, the latest turn, which is connected to a new progressive government turn in at least 3 of the Latin American countries, but at the same time, the tension of not changing the economic model. So there are again left-wingers, but the model of extraction is not being altered. So what is happening in this new epoch that we are starting? The pedagogy that I am going to use is lectures and seminars. So the first block is going to be lectures and the second block is going to be seminars. The first also being more broad in the subjects that we are going to be addressing, and the second one being more going deeper into each of the extractivisms. So first we are going to be looking at traditional extractivism, that's mining and oil and gas, agrarian extractivism, green extractivism, and low carbon extractivism. Students are meant to be engaging both in discussions and also through presentations. The selected literature that we are going to be addressing have been selected, trying to cover the whole Latin America. Of course, within the countries, we are going to find a lot of diversity, but at least we have one key reading from each of the countries in Latin America. And also the literature is gonna express or reflect the different extractivisms as mentioned just before. The mode of assessment for this course is gonna be the participation in the lectures, which is gonna count 30% of the total grade. Seminar presentations, that is also 30% of the total grading, and a final course assessment, which is an individual essay presented of 5,000 words, which counts as 60% of the total. Listo, Majo, ¿cuánto fue?
6 minutes. You were in 5 when you were in the slide number 6.
Okay, super.
Listo. Bueno, tenemos 13 minutos. A ver, ¿cómo hacemos esto? ¿Vamos en orden? ¿Qué quieres? Do you want feedback on the research part first, or do we focus on the feedback for the questions for the course?
I think for the research.
Okay. Okay, so Kelly asked if you can speak more in depth about the interconnectedness of these areas, mining, agriculture, etc., and how those influence your approach or the approach of others working with you. And if there are areas where one could look to develop research at the nexus of all of those, or ways to create solutions with the communities that utilize knowledge of multiple areas of interest like agriculture and mining, and reducing the. This is a very loaded question,
I'm
Kelly.
sorry.
Okay,
I have a quick suggestion then, if it's okay.
yeah.
So 4 of the questions that I saw, Irene, were around this basic idea of asking you a challenging question, which is whether the research that you intend to do in Oxford is going to be limited to Colombia, or is it more unifying concepts? That kind of.
So is it like how you have to answer how your research is generalizable or applicable to other areas with similar?
Or if it is, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, my research has been mostly taken place in Colombia, though I have participated in several projects that also go to other Latin American countries to see what are the similarities and differences in the processes of extraction of resources. So I have connected my research to, for example, the expansion of soy in the Brazilian Amazon, or the use of glyphosate in the border with Ecuador, or comparing a mining extractivism between Peru and Colombia. So those kinds of analytical strategies I have already employed. And in the future, I would like to keep broadening the connections, because I think many of the pressuring forces that take place in one country either affect the bordering countries or are used in very, very similar ways in other Latin American countries. So the idea will be to try to keep that comparative spirit throughout the research in order to understand better how the difference and the similarities work out. Extractivisms, for example, that's a force that has affected the whole Latin America, but the way it materializes, it territorializes in places also varies, and varies in relation to ethnicity, in relation to class differences, in relation to processes of social mobilization and organization. So those are, even though there is one force or one political framework that may be leading change, there are also responses that are going to make the change particular and different. So the spirit is the comparison and the possibility of doing that through different geographies.
Okay, so there is one that I also had, which is which could be your skills and contributions as a professor and researcher of Oxford? And that's the question that was posted, but for me it's also like, why are you the candidate to pursue that research? So like what makes you the outstanding candidate to do this type of research in Latin America?
I feel that this particular position has something that matches my profile, which is the specificity of environmental geography. That is not only human geography, but this ambition of connecting human geography with physical geography. So being able to look at a specific process of ecological change or ecological degradation, contamination, and at the same time connecting those with social aspects of change. And doing that in the Latin American geography. So those two, I mean, that specificity is something that I can contribute at, and that has been my experience. The center has a particular focus in the critical social processes of Latin America. And I have all my life dedicated to having those kinds of bridges with communities and with social movements from Latin America. So I think my own networks can also add and can reinforce the aims and the efforts that the center is already doing. And something that is, of course, a leverage that I can bring to the center are my political connections. So right now, I have had the experience of leading the energy transition for Colombia, which plays to me as well in places where other important political figures of Latin America were. So the idea of being able to, for example, interact with the Minister of Energy from Chile or the Minister of Mines from Ecuador. Those kinds of interactions, I think, could be very relevant to understand the process of change that the continent is facing. And that is also something that I can add to.
Yeah, maybe something also associated with the high risk of doing research in areas of conflict is not something that, you know, a lot of people are looking forward to, which brings me to another question that I have that maybe they will ask you, and is like, what would be like your strategy in terms of recruiting grad students at Oxford, which, you know, in terms of disciplinary background, but also like the skill sets, if you're going to have like continue doing this type of research that requires field work, say in areas of conflict, how are you going to find those students at Oxford?
Yeah, I think
Got
it
you.
is yeah, it's a good question. I'm gonna think about it. Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is the trajectories of research and the research subjects and the research projects are going to attract people. And we can mobilize the networks that I already have in Latin America to recruit people from Latin America that would like to study in Oxford.
Is that part of the institutional goals to, for example, increase diversity and bring international students, or they want you to take their domestic students to new places like Latin America so they have that kind of exposure? Because that could be the way to go.
Yeah, I put in the chat box, Irene, you already had, for example, those 2 students from Switzerland. I'm sure others. That's just an example that came to Univalle.
Yeah. So your suggestion is that I also name international students that have already worked with me.
Well, no, just you have shown success in bringing students from the EU to Univalle working on these projects. And you were quite ambitious.
Okay.
Yeah, So because you're focusing on bringing students from Colombia to Oxford, which may be something that they really want, but you don't know that, right? Unless you have access to their strategic plan, you don't know that. So maybe the best way to go is to approach it in both directions. Like I can, start by recruiting the students that have worked with me in the past, but also I have success with grad students from, I don't know, the other universities
Mhm.
in Europe that have worked in Colombia. So I don't know, something like that. But you didn't answer in terms of the disciplinary background and the skill sets. At least you have to say they have to know some Spanish. It will be brutal to send a student with no Spanish to La Toma.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, something. Okay, what else? We have 2 minutes. Eric, did you find another question that was kind of, multiple people had the same question?
I think that one that we took on was the most challenging one. That one will be loaded.
I don't know how the funding system works in England, right? But one that we always ask is, what agencies are you, or what funding programs are you going to apply to finance your research?
Mhm.
So you have to have an idea of agencies, I don't know, that you could apply to as an Oxford faculty, right? Which I don't know the restrictions.
Okay.
But you
Okay.
have experience successfully doing that too. You have a bunch of funding from the EU.
Yeah.
But that funding is restricted. Like I don't think universities in the EU alone could access that pool of money, right? It was for Latin American
No,
institutions.
no. It was mixed. There are some of the, like the MinCiencias from the UK.
Okay.
Yeah, and like the Horizons 2020 was a
Yeah.
EU-wide.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. So just know some, at least at the top of your head, you have to be able to spit out a couple.
Okay.
And same thing for the interview at Duke. What else? Okay, I will just download the questions and everything in the chat, and I'll send it to you.
Super. Thank you. Thank you everyone
And
for the
then
comments.
Jen will get back to us somehow.
Yeah, I'll follow up. I've got different notes and stuff, and I'll follow up with you, Deanna, and then maybe Irene if you want to talk, or I can just give Deanna the notes, or yeah, I will
Thank you,
follow
Jen.
up. Sure, no problem. It was fantastic. You're fantastic. I'm
or you
blown
can-
away, really.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I don't know if both of you have time now, because I can also make Jen the co-host and jump into my other meeting, and you guys can chat if you have time.
Yeah, I do
I
have
have to.
time.
I have to go now, and I want to be able to listen to the recording again,
Okay.
just so that, not to make
Yeah.
you nervous or anything, Irene, but just I really want to make sure that I can.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's super. No,
Yeah. So
a-
I'll
as
listen
detailed
again.
as possible. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Super. It's super to know that I have to cut my speech to half.
Yes, Majo, you have a question or what before we go?
Yeah, I think it's also an important thing that Professor Irene mentioned was about the conflict. So if she's one to like recruiting students from from the UK and bringing to Colombia or other Latin American countries, I think would be a good idea and think what would be the strategy to take care of the people in those conflict countries. How is she going to control that kind of environment?
Yeah. Univalle has a great support system for that. All right. Bye,
Okay.
everyone.
Gracias. Thank you. Thank you. Chao, amigas.
Chao, espérate, antes de irme, me aseguro de guardar.
Guardar, sí.
Ay,
Ya, ya. ¿Ya
Majo,
tienes el chat, profe?
no sé cómo guardar el Q&A. Tú puedes desde el tuyo, el chat sí lo puedo guardar. Ya lo bajé.
Creo que, no sé si te puedes darme los permisos de seguridad, yo miro acá si puedo hacer algo.
¿Qué hago? ¿Te vuelvo co-host?
Ajá.
Ah, ¿dónde estás, ma? Quintino and Joanna, you can jump to the group meeting. It's a different link. Sorry, we'll be there in a minute. Make co-host. Ok, listo, ahí ya deberías poder.